This is the next in a series of videos on complex numbers, and in this one what we're going to do is we're going to simplify square roots with using I. And in particular what we're going to do is we're going to look at a problem, for example, that looks like this, the square root of minus 80. So the first thing to realize is the square root of minus 80 does not exist. There's no real solution, right? So there's no real number that this simplifies to. But we're going to use complex numbers, and the rule that we're going to use is that I is defined to be the square root of minus 1. So to simplify using I, there's only going to be two steps. The first step is we're going to factor out a minus 1 from the number underneath their square root. Or another way to think of that, factor out an I is equal to the square root of minus 1. And the second part is we're just going to simplify the rest of the root. So this is actually, even though this is a new topic, this is a fairly straightforward problem. The very first thing we do is we notice that there's a negative underneath the square root, so the first thing we do is we break that up into minus 1 and 80, right? Square root of minus 1 is just an I, so you have I equals square root of 80, and we're done with step number 1. And now we're going to do step number 2, and step number 2 is we're going to simplify square root of 80 just like we learned in Algebra 1. Find two numbers that multiply to 80. I'm going to use 4 and 20, so you get I square root of 4 square root of 20. Square root of 4 is 2, so you have I times 2 square root of 20. I'm not quite done yet because square root of 20 still simplifies. That can be broken up into 4 and 5. So that's I times 2 times square root of 4 times square root of 5. Square root of 4 is 2, so that's I times 2 times 2 times square root of 5. And then you get I times 4 times square root of 5. Now, the way we write that usually is we write that as 4I square root of 5. And that's your final answer right there. It's actually fine to write, well anyway, we'll just go on from see that in the next thing. So here's step 1. Step 1 is whenever you have a negative underneath the square root, right, like you do in this problem right here, the first thing you do is you factor out a minus 1. You get to this point, right, because the negative 1, square root of negative 1 becomes 9, and then you just simplify the rest of the problem. Now, it may make more sense to, if you have this problem like this, if you have, we had I times 4 times square root of 5, it may seem like, you know, I sort of like a variable. You may want to write it like this, 4 square root of 5 times I, right, where this is the coefficient, and this is like a variable, right? It turns out that if you want to write it like that, that'd be fine. Most teachers will expect you to write it like this, but mathematically they're equivalent. Let's do another problem. So now let's do square root of minus 175. There's a negative underneath the square root, so the very first thing we'll do is we'll break that up into minus 1 times a positive 175. So you have square root of minus 1, square root of 175. Square root of minus 1 is just I, so you have I times square root of 175. That's the end of step 1. Step 2 is to simplify square root of 175. 175, I think, is 25. I can't remember what it is, though. Let's go 175. Let's go 175 divided by 25 is 7. So that's square root of 7, square root of 25 times I. The square root of 25 becomes a 5, so it's I times square root of 7 times 5, or 5I square root of 7. Alternatively, you could write it 5 root 7I. Doesn't matter. This is kind of the preferred form. And that's how you simplify square roots. One thing you want to be careful here is to not get confused about the negative sign. So let's simplify minus 5 square root of 200. Now this looks similar to the problems that we've been doing, but this is actually a problem from Algebra 1. Look underneath the square root. That's a positive number. So to start with, you just ignore the number outside the square root. Simplify square root of 200. That's simply 2 and 100. So negative 5 square root of 2. Bad 2. So it's going to be minus 5. Let me just start over. That's going to be minus 5 square root of 2 times square root of 100. Square root of 100 is 10, so it's minus 5 times square root of 2 times 10. Since the 10 and the negative 5 are both outside the square root, that's going to be minus square root of 52. And that's your answer right there. Right? And that's how you simplify square roots with I. The next video in part 2, it's going to be part 2 of this video, is simply going to give you a few problems to practice with.